Back with Joan Konner. She was the dean of the Columbia University School of Journalism, arguably the best graduate program in the country, certainly.
I think it is.
Yes, some would not argue with that at all. Also produced at NBC News and was the executive producer for Bill Moyers. So you've got a lot of credibility when it comes to journalism and broadcast journalism especially. Do you watch the evening news anymore? The Katie's, the
Yes,
Bryans, the Charlies?
I do.
What do you think? What do you think of the product?
I think the product is what it has been for a long time, and that's a headline news service. And I think Brian Williams does the job well, and I think Charlie Gibson does the job well. I think that Katie Couric was best known and respected for her human interest reporting. And it occurs to me, I don't know if I'm right, that it was the intention of CBS to change the nature from the so-called hard news. It always amused me that it was hard news for men and soft news for women. I think there are many women who could have done that job of hard news. I'm a particular admirer of Judy Woodruff over the years. She was as head-on, smart, straight as anybody else. I think that Katie's faltered in the ratings because perhaps she's casted the wrong role for what her strengths are.
We've seen ratings go up and down all over the place. Dan, when Rather was there, he was #1 when he first took over and slipped and reclaimed it and then slipped some more.
Right.
So it's not that being third automatically means you're a failure in that business, because quite often the numbers are so tight anyway. Plus, we have to go back to what, you and I know that this business, ratings have been with us for a long time.
Slippery slope.
But for a long time, the news divisions also were insulated to a certain extent by news division presidents who had a sense of gravitas about what they were doing. And I'm not saying that the ones who are there now don't, but also had the corporate and institutional independence, so they could fight a fight and arguably win on the merits.
Right.
And that seems to have evaporated as well now, at least in some places.
It has evaporated. It started in the 80s, and it's at full tilt right now. There's another aspect to the Katie Couric show. If indeed, and I don't know, if indeed they wanted to change the model of the evening news to something different, they must give it time. They must let people get used to it. I mean, 60 Minutes took a long time to catch on, and they simply rode with it until it came to the top. Yeah. So there's that aspect to TV. You go on the air and you edit on the air. You only know it when you see it, and they should give that time. Whether it'll work or not, I don't know. I do think that people turn to the evening news because they want the leading headlines of the day, because that's what they're used to.
When you saw that quote from Dan Rather referring to the tarting up of the news, how did you receive that? What did that say to you?
Two things. One, that Dan has nothing to lose. And the other is, very often people's strengths are also their weaknesses. Dan Rather is a very aggressive, competitive guy, and it has served him very well in his life. And it's also a weakness. His aggressive competitiveness is coming out, and it's wrong. And it was insulting not only to Katie, but it was insulting to women. It was insulting to his previous bosses at CBS. That's what I think.
Why do you think... it struck me as when Katie got the job, on one level, knowing her, you had to feel happy because you like to see people do well to a certain extent. You also like the symbolism that goes with it. But the other thing that occurred to me was, isn't it horrible that we had to wait this long for that kind of symbol? Why did the news... Were the people who run these operations misguided enough to think for a long time that a woman would not be taken seriously? And are they still, do you think, learning the wrong lessons, perhaps, from Katie's ratings experience now?
I think you're exactly right. First of all, Reuven Frank has a quote. He was the former president of NBC News for a very long time. Had a quote from the early 70s that nobody would take news from a woman seriously, and that's in print. I did a show called Women, She Says, Women in News. It ran in 2000 on PBS, and at that particular point in history there were more women in decision-making positions in newsrooms, and they were actually changing the agenda of news. But it was a different time in our history as well. People were taking women seriously. There was more opportunities. They were still, in the executive ranks, women were not well represented, but there was beginning to be a breakthrough and a gradual change in that environment. With this war, it's gone right back to the hard news, soft news template, and
some of the outstanding correspondents, Christina Amanpour,
outstanding,
and others as well, have done, Kimberly Dozier, spectacular work from war zones on military issues.
Marlene Sanders did it back in the 70s.
And I was going to say, and that reminds me of something. In local news, from whence I came in my earlier days, there were women in the 60s who managed to break through and to get the trust of their communities. And I worked with one in Miami when I was coming up, a woman by the name of Ann Bishop, one of the first local anchor women in this country, who owned the market. The viewers had no problem trusting somebody like her to give them the evening news, regardless of whether it was, some wonderful fair pageant going on in town, or a horrible problem, or a war breaking out. Why on a national level? Is it a corporate thing?
It's trying to identify the strengths of the particular female correspondent. And I think that Katie Couric's strength has been, and this is personal opinion, has been in human interest.
So it's just picking the wrong woman. They looked at the ratings from the Today Show and they said, we want that.
Yes. Yeah. And I think for Dan Rather to describe it as tarting up is, sour grapes or whatever. It was an intemperate comment, which he has made before, and I say both a strength and a weakness.
Indeed. When we come back, I want to talk about not just the personalities involved, but the story selections themselves, some of the weaknesses in what we're seeing actually going on the air. Back with Joan Konner in a moment. Don't go away.